Hello guys, welcome to Infinite Stories. Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. Let's get into the story. Sandra gazed out the window of her father's mansion, the weight of the world pressing down on her. She had always been surrounded by wealth and luxury, yet felt a profound emptiness. Her father, Solomon, a controlling billionaire, held her in his tight grip, defining every aspect of her life. While he constantly praised her beauty, Sandra began to realize it wasn't out of love, but ownership. She longed for freedom, for a life where she wasn't just a reflection of his desires. One evening, Solomon invited Sandra into his study, offering her a drink. His compliments felt strange, too intense, and as he spoke of her beauty, a discomfort grew inside her. She drank the juice, not realizing it was laced with a sleeping drug. As the room spun, her vision blurred, and she collapsed onto the couch, helpless to fight the growing dizziness. The night had begun to turn in an unsettling direction. Sandra awoke in her room, her body aching and disoriented. She noticed the blood on the sheets and understood the horrifying truth: her father had betrayed her. The shock was unbearable, and she stumbled to the bathroom, feeling both physically and emotionally violated. The man who had raised her had crossed a line that could never be undone. Tears filled her eyes as she struggled to comprehend the depths of his actions. With her heart heavy and broken, Sandra knew she couldn't stay in this house. Her father's betrayal had shattered everything. She gathered herself, dressed quickly, and fled. The mansion that had once felt like home now felt like a prison. Sandra was determined to leave behind the man who had destroyed her trust, but she had nowhere to go and no plan, only the desire to escape the nightmare that had unfolded. In the days that followed, Sandra wandered through the city, lost and aimless. She had no family to turn to, no friends to help her. Eventually, she stumbled upon a small, abandoned hut on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was a refuge. Here, in the isolation of the small cabin, Sandra felt a sense of freedom. She could begin again, even if she didn't know where to start. The life she once knew was gone, but this humble space gave her a chance to heal. As she adjusted to her new life, Sandra found work doing odd jobs in the nearby village. It wasn't glamorous, but it allowed her to survive. Her pregnancy, though unexpected, gave her a reason to keep going. She focused on building a life for herself and her unborn child, determined to rise above the betrayal that had defined her past. Though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew she was stronger than she had ever been before. Sandra's pregnancy became the subject of local gossip. The villagers, unaware of the true nature of her story, whispered behind her back. They called her names and looked at her with judgment in their eyes. Sandra, though hurt by their ignorance, learned to ignore their cruel words. She had no choice but to stay strong for the child growing inside her. The whispers only fueled her resolve to never return to the life she had left behind. One day, as she worked in the fields, Sandra felt a pang of longing for the family she had once had. Despite everything, she still carried a piece of the woman she used to be, the daughter Solomon had once doted on. But that life was gone. The betrayal had stripped her of her former self, and though she mourned the loss, she knew she could never go back. Her heart hardened with the resolve that her past would not define her. She would fight for a future, no matter how difficult. Though Sandra had fled her father's world, she could not escape the memories of him. Solomon's wealth and influence were vast, and his reach extended far beyond the mansion. One evening, she received an unexpected letter from him, a reminder of the man who had betrayed her. The words on the paper were cold, offering no apology, no remorse, only an assertion of his power. "I will find you," the letter read, chilling Sandra to her core. She tore it up, vowing never to let him back into her life. With every passing day, Sandra became more determined to protect herself and her child. She knew her father wouldn't stop looking for her, but she had found the strength to survive on her own. She couldn't change the past, but she could control her future. The fear of his pursuit loomed over her, but it only served to fuel her desire for independence. She would not let him win. As the months passed, Sandra's pregnancy advanced, and with it, her sense of responsibility. She had always dreamed of a family, but not like this. The child growing inside her was both a reminder of her pain and her strength. She had little to offer, a small hut and an uncertain future, but she was determined to give her baby a life free from the shadow of Solomon. The child was her hope, her reason to move forward. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she couldn't let fear take away the chance for a better life. The villagers, though skeptical of her presence, began to offer small gestures of kindness. Some brought her food, others helped with small tasks around the hut. Sandra didn't ask for their help, but she accepted it with gratitude. These moments of kindness were a reminder that not everyone judged her. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life, finding strength in the simple things. With her baby on the way, she felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination to build something good, no matter what. As Sandra's due date drew closer, she began to feel a renewed sense of hope. She spent hours preparing the small hut for the arrival of her child, cleaning, organizing, and making the space as comfortable as possible. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but the thought of becoming a mother filled her with strength. The whispers of the village faded into the background as she focused on what really mattered, creating a safe and loving home for her baby. Though she still carried the scars of her past, Sandra had found a new sense of purpose. The life she had once known was gone, but a new chapter was beginning. In the quiet of the night, Sandra would often find herself lost in thought, wondering what the future held. Despite the fear and uncertainty, she knew one thing for sure: she would never return to the man who had caused her so much pain. Her child would grow up in a world where love and safety came first, not power and control. The shadow of her father would always be there, but she refused to let it define her. She was ready for whatever came next. The birth of Sandra's child, a boy whom she named Clinton, was a moment of both joy and sorrow. As she held him in her arms for the first time, she was overwhelmed with emotion. He was the symbol of her strength, her resilience. But as she gazed down at his innocent face, a part of her couldn't help but feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was a mother now, and every decision she made would affect his future. The love she had for him was fierce, and she swore to protect him from the horrors of her past. She knew that, for Clinton's sake, she would have to stay strong, no matter the obstacles in her way. As the days passed, Sandra's connection with her son grew stronger. She had no idea how she would manage to raise him alone, but she knew she would find a way. The village, though small and poor, had become her home. People began to accept her, no longer whispering behind her back. Sandra was no longer just the woman who had run away from her father's mansion. She was a mother, a survivor. And she would do whatever it took to give Clinton the life he deserved. Solomon never gave up searching for Sandra. Despite her best efforts to hide, his wealth and influence allowed him to track her down. One day, while Sandra was tending to Clinton, a messenger arrived with another letter from her father. The words were sharp, filled with threats. Solomon had found her. The letter demanded her return, warning that there would be consequences if she refused. Sandra's heart sank as she read the words, but this time, she didn't crumble. She couldn't. She had built a life here, and she would protect it at all costs. She knew Solomon's pursuit was inevitable, but she was ready for whatever he threw her way. Fear gripped Sandra's heart, but she pushed it aside. She wasn't the same woman who had fled the mansion all those months ago. She had come too far, and her child's future depended on her strength. Sandra made a vow to herself that day: she would not let her father's cruelty dictate her life any longer. If he came for her, she would fight back, no matter what it took. The battle for her freedom was just beginning. With each passing day, Sandra grew more determined. She had learned the hard way that running away wasn't enough to escape her father's grasp. He would never stop trying to control her life, but this time, Sandra was prepared. She began making plans, gathering information, reaching out to people who might be able to help her. She knew that the only way to truly be free was to confront Solomon, to hold him accountable for what he had done. But she wouldn't do it alone. She reached out to a trusted lawyer who had been recommended by a local friend. The legal battle ahead would be long and difficult, but Sandra was ready. She would see her father face justice, not just for the horrors he had inflicted upon her, but for the future she wanted to build for Clinton. Sandra's decision to seek justice against Solomon was not easy. She spent sleepless nights gathering her courage, unsure of what the legal battle would bring. The lawyer she had contacted, a woman named Rachel, met with Sandra in secret, ensuring that no word of their plans would reach Solomon. Together, they began to formulate a case, gathering evidence and testimonies from those who had seen the cracks in Solomon's carefully crafted facade. Sandra knew this would be her hardest fight, but her resolve had never been clearer. It wasn't just for her, it was for Clinton, for the chance to give him a life free from the shadow of his grandfather's abuse. In the quiet of the night, Sandra often found herself lost in thought, wondering if her father would ever truly face the consequences of his actions. She had seen his power, his ability to manipulate and control. But now, she was no longer the naive daughter who had blindly trusted him. She was a mother, a woman fighting for her child's future, and she would not back down. She steeled herself for the long road ahead, knowing that every step she took brought her closer to the justice she had longed for. As the case began to take shape, Sandra was surprised by the support she received from unexpected sources. Some members of the village, once critical of her, began to stand by her side, offering their help. They had seen her strength, her determination to rise above the pain, and they admired her courage. Even more surprising was a woman named Evelyn, an old friend of Solomon's who had once worked for the family. Evelyn had witnessed Solomon's cruelty firsthand and came forward, offering crucial information that would strengthen Sandra's case. Though Sandra had once felt alone, she now realized that her struggle was not hers alone to bear. People were beginning to rally around her. The support, though a glimmer of hope, also came with its challenges. Sandra had to navigate the suspicion and judgment that still lingered from her past. Some questioned her motives, others dismissed her as an opportunist, but she knew she could not let the negativity derail her progress. Every act of support, every word of encouragement, fueled her resolve to see the fight through. The road to justice would be hard, but with each ally, Sandra felt stronger. The day of the trial arrived, and Sandra stood in front of the courtroom, her heart pounding. She had never imagined that she would one day face her father in such a public way. The courtroom buzzed with the tension of the case. Solomon's lawyers were already preparing their defense, while Rachel, Sandra's lawyer, spoke confidently about the gravity of the charges. As Sandra listened to the opening arguments, she felt both a sense of disbelief and determination. She was finally standing up for herself, and she would not allow Solomon's manipulation to win again. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about every woman who had been silenced by power and fear. Solomon's presence in the courtroom sent chills down Sandra's spine. His arrogance was palpable as he sat with his legal team, confident that his wealth and influence would protect him. But Sandra was not the frightened young woman she had once been. She had seen the ugly truth behind his smile, and now, she was ready to expose it. The trial would be long and grueling, but Sandra knew she had to endure. Her courage would be tested in ways she had never imagined, but she would not let her father's control dictate her fate any longer. As the trial progressed, the testimony of Evelyn and others revealed the depths of Solomon's manipulation and cruelty. Evelyn spoke of the many times she had witnessed Solomon's inappropriate behavior, not just toward Sandra, but toward others in his life. Her words were a damning account of Solomon's character, and Sandra felt a sense of vindication as the truth began to surface. Yet, the defense team worked tirelessly to discredit every witness, trying to paint Sandra as unstable and untrustworthy. Despite the emotional toll, Sandra stood firm. She knew that if the truth was going to be heard, she had to remain strong. The courtroom was often a battleground of words, with Solomon's lawyers attacking Sandra's credibility at every turn. But with each challenge, Sandra grew more resolute. She couldn't let the lies and manipulation continue. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but she had come too far to back down now. The weight of the past still hung over her, but she refused to let it define her. Her father's wealth and power would no longer control her future. The trial took its toll on Sandra, both physically and emotionally. The constant reminders of her past, the public scrutiny, and the pressure of the legal battle weighed heavily on her. There were moments when she felt like giving up, when the pain of reliving the trauma seemed unbearable. But each time, she would look at Clinton, and the thought of him kept her going. She was fighting for his future, for the chance to give him a life filled with love and safety. No matter how difficult the journey, she couldn't let him grow up in the shadow of her past. During the quieter moments of the trial, Sandra would reflect on how far she had come. She remembered the woman who had fled her father's mansion, broken and lost, but now, standing in front of the courtroom, she saw a woman who had found her strength. Each word of testimony, each piece of evidence, was a step closer to reclaiming her life. The journey was exhausting, but Sandra would not stop. She owed it to herself, and to Clinton, to see this fight through to the end. Just when Sandra felt the weight of the trial becoming too much to bear, a breakthrough came. One of Solomon's former employees came forward, willing to testify against him. This individual had witnessed Solomon's abuse firsthand and was finally ready to speak out. Their testimony was the turning point Sandra had been waiting for. As the details of Solomon's actions were laid bare, the courtroom grew tense. It was clear that the evidence was mounting against him. Sandra felt a flicker of hope as the tide began to turn in her favor, but she knew the battle was far from over. Solomon, however, remained defiant. His arrogance was unmatched, and he continued to deny all allegations, confident that his wealth would shield him from the consequences. Yet, as the testimonies piled up, it became harder for him to maintain his innocence. The cracks in his facade were becoming more apparent, and Sandra could see the desperation beginning to show in his eyes. Though the journey was far from complete, Sandra allowed herself a brief moment of triumph. For the first time in a long while, she felt as though justice was within reach. Solomon's lawyers grew more aggressive as the trial continued, trying every tactic to discredit Sandra and her witnesses. They attempted to paint her as an unfit mother, questioning her character and accusing her of seeking revenge. But Sandra stood tall, unwavering in her resolve. She knew the truth, and nothing would change that. Solomon, realizing the case was slipping away from him, began to show signs of desperation. He attempted to offer Sandra a settlement, promising her money and security in exchange for dropping the charges. But Sandra refused. She knew that no amount of money could erase the damage he had done to her, to their family. This wasn't about money, it was about justice. The offer felt like a slap in the face. Solomon was trying to buy his way out of responsibility, as he always had. But Sandra had learned the value of her own voice. This fight was no longer just about her, it was about reclaiming her dignity, her power, and ensuring that Clinton would never have to face the same horrors she had. She refused to let her father dictate the terms of her life any longer. As the trial entered its final stages, Sandra felt a growing sense of anticipation. The evidence was undeniable, and the witnesses' testimonies had painted a clear picture of Solomon's actions. Yet, there was still a lingering fear that the case could go either way. Solomon's wealth and influence were powerful, and there was always the chance that they could sway the decision in his favor. But Sandra refused to let fear control her. She had come too far to back down now. She held her breath as the judge began to deliver the final verdict, praying that justice would finally be served. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the decision. Sandra's heart raced in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The judge had ruled in her favor. Solomon would face the consequences of his actions. Sandra could hardly believe it. After everything, justice had finally been served. She felt a rush of relief and triumph as she realized that her fight had not been in vain. For the first time in years, she felt free. With the trial over and Solomon facing legal consequences, Sandra began to rebuild her life. The road ahead was still challenging, but she was no longer burdened by the weight of her past. She focused on providing a stable and loving home for Clinton, ensuring that he would never have to endure the pain she had suffered. The village, once filled with judgment, now embraced her as one of their own. Sandra felt a sense of belonging that had eluded her for so long. Though the scars of her past would never fully disappear, Sandra found peace in the life she had built. She had fought for her freedom, and in doing so, had created a future filled with hope. As Clinton grew, Sandra knew that she had given him something precious, a chance at a life defined by love, not fear. For the first time in a long while, Sandra could look forward to tomorrow, knowing that she had control over her own destiny. As Sandra stood on the hill outside her small hut, watching Clinton play with other children, she felt a sense of pride that she had never known before. The journey had been long, painful, and filled with obstacles, but she had emerged stronger than she ever thought possible. She had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her future. Looking at Clinton, she knew the battle was worth it. Solomon's control over her life had been broken, and she had fought not just for herself, but for the future she wanted to build for her son. Sandra had come a long way from the broken girl who had fled her father's mansion. She had found her strength in the most unlikely of places, within herself. With a final glance at the horizon, Sandra smiled, knowing that her story, though shaped by pain, would end in triumph. She had won, not just against her father, but against the very forces that sought to keep her down. And in this victory, she found the peace she had longed for. Sandra's life had changed dramatically since the trial. Although the weight of her past still lingered, she was no longer defined by it. She had spent countless nights reflecting on how far she had come, from being an innocent daughter, unaware of her father's cruel intentions, to a mother who had taken control of her own fate. Now, in the quiet of her new life, she allowed herself to heal. The pain was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. Clinton was growing strong, and the love she felt for him filled the emptiness she once had. Sandra had also begun to form new relationships based on mutual respect, not power or manipulation. She slowly let her walls down, finding trust in those who genuinely cared for her. The villagers, who had once whispered behind her back, now respected her. She had earned her place among them, not just through her struggle, but by the grace and courage she displayed along the way. Every step forward was a testament to her resilience. With each passing day, the echoes of her past grew quieter, replaced by the hopeful sound of a future she could finally control. As time passed, Sandra decided it was time to leave the small hut and start anew. The village had been a place of refuge, but she wanted more for herself and Clinton. She dreamed of a life where they could thrive, not just survive. After years of battling her father's hold over her, Sandra was determined to create a new identity, one that was hers alone. She found a modest house on the outskirts of the village, a place where she could give Clinton a peaceful childhood, free from the shadow of her father's cruelty. Building a new life wasn't easy. Sandra worked hard, finding small jobs here and there to support herself and Clinton. She was proud of her independence and never once asked for handouts. With every dollar earned, she was reminded of how far she had come. For the first time in years, Sandra felt in control of her destiny. The fear that once plagued her was now replaced by a quiet strength, and she knew that the worst was behind her. It was a new beginning, one she embraced with open arms. One afternoon, as Sandra worked in her garden, she heard a car pulling up to her new home. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Solomon. She hadn't heard from him since the trial, and she hadn't expected to. The sight of him standing at her doorstep was a stark reminder of the man she had fought so hard to escape. Yet, as much as she wanted to slam the door in his face, Sandra knew she had to face him, on her own terms. Solomon's face was different than the arrogant man she remembered. The weight of his legal troubles had clearly taken a toll on him. He tried to appeal to Sandra, claiming that he had changed, that he was sorry for everything he had done. But Sandra didn't trust his words. She had heard them before, and they meant nothing now. She had no intention of forgiving him or allowing him back into her life. With quiet strength, she told him to leave. The moment he turned away, Sandra felt a sense of closure. She was no longer a victim of his manipulations. Sandra's decision to turn her back on Solomon was not easy, but it was necessary. It wasn't just about closing a chapter of her past, it was about making sure that she never allowed herself to be manipulated again. Her life with Clinton was the most important thing now. Yet, as much as she had learned to trust herself, the process of rebuilding trust with others proved to be more challenging. She kept her distance, cautious about who she allowed into her world. She had been betrayed by the person she trusted most, and that made it hard to trust anyone again. But as time went on, Sandra began to realize that not everyone was like Solomon. She formed close bonds with a few people who had shown her genuine care. Slowly but surely, Sandra let her guard down. She allowed herself to believe that there were people in the world who would treat her and Clinton with the respect they deserved. It wasn't easy, but every new relationship was a step toward healing. Sandra understood now that while trust could be broken, it could also be rebuilt, with time and effort. Just as Sandra was beginning to find peace in her new life, a new challenge arose. The media, having caught wind of the trial and its sensational details, began to take an interest in her story once again. Reporters and photographers camped outside her home, demanding answers to questions she wasn't prepared to answer. The past, which she had worked so hard to leave behind, was now being dragged back into the spotlight. It seemed like every day brought new accusations and speculations, and Sandra found herself at the center of a media storm. Though she had come so far, the constant pressure of the media left her feeling exposed and vulnerable. She had worked so hard to build a life outside the shadows of her father, but now it felt like she was being pulled back into the chaos. It was a reminder that her past would never fully let her go. But Sandra knew she couldn't let it defeat her again. She had survived too much already. She would face this challenge, just as she had faced every other one, with strength and resilience. In the midst of the media storm, Sandra found herself questioning everything she had fought for. The public's interest in her private life was overwhelming, and a constant barrage of questions made it feel like she was reliving her trauma all over again. But she refused to let the media dictate her life. Instead of hiding, she decided to take control of the narrative. Sandra held a press conference, where she spoke honestly and openly about her experiences, refusing to let anyone define her story except for herself. Her words were powerful, and the media was forced to listen. In that moment, Sandra realized just how far she had come. She had found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. The press conference became a turning point, not just in her struggle against the media, but in her personal journey. Sandra understood that her past did not define her future, and that she could not be broken by the opinions of others. The media frenzy eventually died down, but the experience left Sandra with new insights. She had faced the world and her past head-on, and she had come out stronger for it. Sandra no longer lived in fear of what others thought of her. She had reclaimed her life from the darkness that had once consumed it, and now, she lived for herself and her son. The constant self-doubt that had plagued her in the early days was now replaced with confidence. She no longer needed validation from anyone but herself. Clinton, too, was growing into a strong young boy, unaffected by the weight of his grandfather's legacy. Sandra worked hard to ensure that he would never know the fear and shame she had experienced. She poured all of her love into him, teaching him the value of kindness, strength, and resilience. Sandra's own strength had become a foundation for Clinton's growth, and she knew that as long as they had each other, they would face whatever challenges the future held. With the storm of her past finally behind her, Sandra found a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had established a life filled with quiet contentment. She worked from home, running a small business that allowed her to balance work and motherhood. The village, once a place of judgment, had become a community of support. People respected her for her courage, and Sandra had become an example of strength in the face of adversity. In the evenings, she would sit by the fire with Clinton, telling him stories of her journey and teaching him the importance of perseverance. It was a peaceful life, one that Sandra had earned through years of struggle and sacrifice. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she was ready. She had found peace in the present, and for the first time in a long while, she could finally breathe. Though Sandra had found peace, there was one last thing she needed to do: say goodbye to the remnants of her past. One evening, she took a long walk through the village, reflecting on everything she had been through. As she stood at the edge of the place where she had once lived in fear, Sandra felt a sense of closure. The anger, the pain, the resentment, it all faded into the distance. She had survived, and now it was time to move on completely. Sandra had spent so many years running from her past, but now, she understood that the only way to truly move forward was to release it. With a deep breath, she whispered her final goodbye to the life she had once known. She no longer needed to carry it with her. What mattered now was the life she had built with Clinton, a life defined not by her father's actions, but by her own strength. As Sandra looked out at the horizon, watching Clinton chase butterflies in the field, she smiled. The journey had been long, but it had led her to this moment of peace. She had fought for her freedom, and in doing so, had created a life filled with love, hope, and possibility. The legacy of her strength would live on in Clinton, and in the stories she would tell him as he grew older. Sandra had broken free from the chains of her past, and in doing so, had paved the way for a better future. She knew that the battle was never truly over, that life would always present new challenges, but for now, Sandra was content. She had conquered the darkness, and in its place, a new light had emerged, a light that would guide her and Clinton forward into a future of limitless possibility. That's the end of the story. What did you learn about the story? Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. Thanks for watching.